Good evening again, ladies and gentlemen, my dear students in Philippine banking laws. This is the continuation of the first lesson that we had on chapter 1. So, what are the liabilities for acts of officers and employees? So, may mga liability aning mga bank officers and employees. So, remember, in our first discussion, we talk about fiduciary trust, no? Highest degree of integrity and performance. So a bank is liable for the wrongful acts of its officers done in the interest of the bank or dealings as bank representatives, but not for acts outside the scope of their authority. So take note, bank is liable for the wrongful acts of its officers done in the interest of the bank or dealings as bank representatives, but not for acts outside the scope of their authority. So, example, negligence of manager. Negligence of manager, employer is liable to the acts of the manager, especially if the manager is acting his capacity as a manager or as a bank employee. But if he is acting on his proprietary siya mismo, personally, well, it's not. It's not. But within the nature of banking, manager's act is an act of the bank. And therefore, the bank as an employer is liable for the acts of the manager. Negligence of officer. So, general rule, tortious acts of officers within their scope of employment shall make banks liable. So, sila yung mga gipang permahan, gipang release ng mga funds, disburse ng mga funds, and other funds, that as long as within their mandate, their duties and functions, they will be that will be kana bang maangkon, no, ang bangko mismo mo ay magabayad ana, like what you have experienced so far, like tato ganing na atoy RCBC, involving RCBC, no, it's a known case, no, katong central bank in other country, tapos na atoy nakasulod diri from one branch of that bank. So the Bangko Sentral actually penalized that bank. That's billion penalty to the bank. And then of course the officers, napud sila ilahong kaugalingon nga mga criminal sanctions and criminal liabilities. Negligence of tellers, mga bank tellers. Tellers must exercise high degree of diligence. Tellers should not give passbook to wrong person, as a person in possession of passbook is presumed to be an owner. Dili na pwede. Appropriation of deposited money by the teller is not estafa, but considered as theft, as the client only had material possession of it. Such deposit money are considered owned by the bank. So, na yung mga teller nila, tapos withdrawhan nila tong account nimo, kay daghan, tapos tigulang na kawakakabalo na kay ano. So, it is called theft rather than estafa. Pangawat, no? Right to recover from employees. The banks have the right to recover from employees na ay mga pangawat or mga modus, no? Liability for damages. Pwede sila maka-claim actual, exemplary, moral damages. We also have actual and compensatory. The interest due shall itself earn interest from the time it is judicially demanded. Usually in this case 12% legal interest when judgment becomes final and executory, and 6% interest for obligations not constituting a loan or forbearance of money. So this is, we have the liability for damages. We have moral damages. But as a general rule, a corporation is not entitled to moral damages. An exemption on that when its good reputation is besmirched by breach of fiduciary duty. Okay? So we call that one in law as culpa contractual or a breach of contract. Okay? Or there is, it is recoverable if there is fraud or bad faith. Culpa contractual, bad faith. Fraud. Okay. Depositor may recover even if bank's negligence not attended by bad faith if he suffered mental anguish and serious anxiety, etc. So careful with ang bangko. And respondent superior of employees. Command responsibility. A bank is bound by negligence of its employees. So that is clear. What are the classification of banks? We have discussed universal, commercial, rural, thrift, Islamic, cooperative. Okay? Let us first discuss about universal banks. So, universal banks are large commercial banks that can do both commercial and investment banking. So, the question sa atong exam, all commercial banks are universal banks, but not all universal banks are commercial banks. So, what's the answer? The answer is all commercial banks are universal banks, but not all universal banks. False. It should be all commercial banks are all universal. I forgot the exact usa akong gibutang dito sa exam, but definitely when we say commercial, ang trabaho sa universal banks, ang trabaho sa commercial banks can be performed by universal banks. But ang trabaho sa universal banks cannot perform by commercial banks. Okay? The banks that can do both commercial and investment banking, that's the universal banks. Okay? They have the power of both commercial bank and investment house. So it's only the universal bank that can have investment houses. But investment houses will not be registered by, it will be still be directly and no longer be under the regulatory powers of the Bangko Sentral, but investment houses will be under the Securities and Exchange Commission. Have the power to invest in non-allied enterprises. Commercial banks, general powers in incident of corporation and can perform commercial banking. It does not have the power to invest in non-allied enterprises. Look at the GBL, if you read closely, only the universal banks can avail of both non-bank and allied and non-allied enterprises. But for commercial banks, they do not have the power to invest in non-allied enterprises. Rural banks. Rural banks, banks that promote rural development. Okay? Example, we have Ablan Rural Bank, Bakong Rural Bank, Dumaguete Rural Bank Incorporated. SG Bank is a rural bank, formerly owned 100% by the Cinco, the owner of our university, no? But now it was being purchased. Majority stocks there are owned by Bravo, the owner of Bravo Resort, no? Kanang naong SG Bank sa pagkakaroon. So they can extend loan or advances to primarily meet the normal credit needs of farmers, fishermen, and their families. Can also deposit in private banks more than the amount prescribed by the single borrower's limit in case there are no government banks. So usually, nana sila gitawag nato mga conduit banks. The rural banks will deposit their money to the commercial banks or universal banks. Especially kung ang ilang vault capacity gamay, so wala sila mabutangan dito sa ilang for safety purposes. And for insurance purposes, ilan ang gibutang pod sa ilahon nga mga conduit banks or commercial or universal banks. Okay? We will be discussing later on Rural Bank Act RA 7353. That will be our succeeding topics as we end the term. Thrift banks encourages the industry, frugality, and accumulation of savings of the public. So take note, talks about thrift banks. Thrift, from the word itself, thrift. Frugality, industry, accumulation of savings, okay, of the public. So what's the purpose? To make it within easy to reach to the people the credit facilities at a reasonable cost. And includes savings and mortgage bank. And includes stocks, savings, and loan associations and private development banks. So, give me an example of a private development bank. Dumaguete City Development Bank is an example of a thrift bank. Okay? And we will study also the Thrift Bank Acts on Republic Act number 7906. Cooperative banks. Cooperative banks, these are organized by cooperatives, primary cooperatives, and even secondary cooperatives to provide financial and credit services to the cooperatives pursuant to Republic Act number 6938 as amended by Republic Act number 9520. So membership of a cooperative bank shall include only cooperative and federations of cooperatives. So stock owners there are composed of primary and secondary cooperatives. Islamic banks promote socio-economic development in autonomous region in Muslim Mindanao by performing banking and investment function based on Islamic concept of banking. So take note, this is subject to the principles and rulings of Islamic Sharia laws. So this is being governed by Republic Act number 6848, but I know there is an amended Islamic banking in the Philippines, amended law 10 something. So I'll be discussing on that separately, but we will focus on Islamic banking on RA 6848 as amended by a new law. Okay, but definitely the concepts, it only changes on its nature, its capitalization, as well as other salient features of the new law. We have other banks. We have specialized banks. We have Land Bank of the Philippines. The purpose of Land Bank of the Philippines, a specialist government bank, finance distribution of estate to resell to small landholders. That is per Charter Republic Act number 3844. We also have the Philippine Veterans Bank. It's created to provide government depository to veterans for appreciation of grateful nation. Republic Act number 3518. We also have the Development Bank of the Philippines. That's to provide credit facilities for development in agriculture, commerce, and industry. So DBP was previously named as Rehabilitation Finance Corporation. We also have the Non-Stock Savings and Loan Associations, Non-Stock Corporation, Non-Profit Corporation, engaged in the accumulation of savings of its members and loans to meet its members' needs. We have the Armed Forces of the Philippines, Non-Stock Savings and Loan Association. You can find it there near the Dumaguete City Development Bank, Qualfon, old Qualfon building. There you can find the AFP Non-Stock Savings Association. So they confine exclusive membership and cannot transact business with the general public. They can only transact business with their members. Quasi-banks engage in borrowing of funds through issuance of deposit substitute for the purpose of relending or purchasing receivables and other obligations. I have given this in our quiz. Then we have offshore banks. Offshore banks deals with transaction with foreign currencies in receiving funds from external sources and utilization of such. This being governed by Presidential Decree 1034. Okay? So if you have questions, kindly email me, or you can actually post your message over our group chat. So na may mga pangutana, much better dito so I can address further your questions. I can elaborate details if possible. Let's proceed. Authority to engage in banking and quasi-banking functions. Sa may mga authority ani niya. So take note that in our discussion, I said, no banking or no person rather or entity shall engage in banking operations without authority from the Bangko Sentral ng Pilipinas. Universal or commercial banks may engage in quasi-banking functions. This talks about deposit substitutes, deposit liabilities. Under Corporation Code, no articles of incorporation or amendment of bank shall be given unless accompanied by the recommendation of appropriate government agency, which is the Monetary Board of the Philippines. The determination whether the person or entity is performing banking or quasi-banking functions without authority from the BSP shall be determined by the Monetary Board. The Monetary Board will examine the books and records to achieve the purpose. We also have the department head and examiners can administer maka-administer ng oath and compel presentation of books, documents, or records. The BSP can examine a bank or an enterprise that is wholly or majority owned by the bank. This can only be done when BSP is an examining bank. The Securities and Exchange Commission shall not register articles of incorporation of bank unless it is accompanied by authority of the Monetary Board. The Securities and Exchange Commission shall not register bylaws of bank unless accompanied by authority of the Bangko Sentral ng Pilipinas. So, service of summons upon banks. So, mga problema ng mga bangko shall be done or shall be coursed through the president, managing partner, general manager, corporate secretary, treasurer, etc. Okay? Bank name. Only universal and commercial banks may represent itself to the public as such in connection with its business name. So, muna mingon ta nga BDO Unibank. Okay? Thrift banks can be allowed to have a business name of its own, provided that a thrift bank, savings bank, or a private development bank shall be added. Dumaguete City Development Bank, a development bank. Okay? Above rule is also available to rural or cooperative banks. We have SG Bank, a rural bank. Okay? So, that's actually mandated under the Republic Act that we discussed pertaining to the General Banking Law. That ends for our session. Keep posted and updated for the next discussion. Thank you.